It had been a typical late autumn afternoon when Loren's proposal left everyone in the room stunned. The soft hum of the conversation, the clinking of silverware, the warmth of the fire crackling in the hearth. These were the things that had defined that evening at the grand dinner table. What was supposed to be an intimate family gathering quickly turned into a moment of shock, confusion, and silence as Loren, a longtime family friend, unexpectedly proposed marriage to Faith's mother, Helen. Helen, sitting at the head of the table, had been talking about her latest painting, the one she had been working on for weeks, when Loren interrupted. At first, everyone thought he was simply going to make a joke, his usual method of cutting into a conversation with his dry humor. But the words he spoke next were anything but funny. "Helen," Loren began, his voice unusually serious. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and I can't keep it to myself any longer. Will you marry me?" The table went silent. Faith, who had been sitting next to her mother, dropped her fork. Her face went pale as she stared at Loren, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. It wasn't that Loren was a stranger to the family, quite the opposite. He had been a close family friend for over a decade. But this was beyond the realm of any possibility she could have imagined. Helen, who had been about to take a sip of wine, froze mid-motion. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of disbelief. Loren had always been there for them, always a reassuring presence when things had gotten tough, but they had never shared any romantic connection. She knew Loren well, perhaps too well, his quirks, his sarcasm, his gentle way of always deflecting deeper conversations about relationships. To think that this man, who had often spoken of his lack of interest in settling down, was now asking her to marry him, it was enough to leave anyone reeling. "Wait, what?" Faith finally managed to say, her voice shaky, but edged with confusion and a hint of anger. She hadn't seen this coming, not in a million years. Loren turned to Faith with a look of understanding in his eyes, as if he had been preparing for this reaction. "I know this is unexpected, but I have thought about this for a long time." Faith could hardly process the words, let alone understand the depth of their implications. She glanced at her mother, who still hadn't said a word, her expression unreadable. It wasn't like her mother to be speechless. Helen was the type of woman who always knew what to say, who always had a calming word or a witty retort. But this was different. Faith's heart was pounding in her chest, and she wasn't sure whether she was angry or just profoundly disturbed by what had just transpired. She had never imagined Loren as someone who might one day be with her mother, let alone marry her. Loren was like an older brother to Faith, someone who had always been there to lend a hand or offer advice. The idea of him and her mother as a romantic couple, let alone a married one, felt wrong on so many levels. Her voice cracked as she turned to her mother. "Mom, are you going to say something?" Helen blinked as though waking from a trance, and slowly set her wine glass down. Her gaze flickered between Faith and Loren, a mixture of confusion and contemplation crossing her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. I don't know what to say," Helen murmured, her voice fragile. "Loren, this is so unexpected." Loren took a deep breath, his eyes still on Helen. "I understand. I didn't expect it to be easy, but I've been thinking about this for a long time. You and I have been through so much together, Helen. We've been friends, confidants, partners in many ways. I think it's time we take the next step." Helen's mind raced as she tried to process the gravity of the situation. She had always respected Loren. There was no doubt about that. They had shared years of history, both personal and professional, and they understood each other in ways that few people could. But marrying him, that was an entirely different matter. The thought of romance with Loren, especially now that she was in her mid-40s and had already been through a difficult divorce, was something that had never crossed her mind. She had grown accustomed to her independence, the quiet comfort of being a single mother. She had raised Faith on her own, and though there had been moments of loneliness, she had always believed that she was capable of handling it on her own. Loren had never seemed to want anything more than friendship, so why now? Why this sudden, unexpected proposal? Faith stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't happening," she said, shaking her head. "Mom, please tell me you're not actually considering this." Helen looked at Faith, her eyes softening. "I don't know, sweetheart. This is a lot to process. I need some time to think." "But you don't need time," Faith insisted. "You don't need to think about this. It's crazy. Loren's he's like family. We don't just start marrying family members." Loren's face tightened slightly, though he didn't interrupt. He knew that Faith was just trying to protect her mother, but he had made his decision. He had to follow through. "Honey," Helen said gently, turning her gaze to Faith, "I know this is a shock, but maybe it's not as crazy as you think. Loren and I have been through a lot together. I think we understand each other in ways that others don't. It might not be what you expected, but sometimes life surprises us." Faith's chest tightened as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. "This is different, Mom. This is Loren. He's not a guy you marry. He's the guy you have long conversations with about books and history, the guy you have a beer with on the porch. Her voice faltered, unsure of how to finish the sentence. She had spent so many years thinking of Loren as a constant, someone who was always just there. The thought of him becoming a permanent fixture in their family in a way that felt wrong was too much to bear. Loren's face softened as he looked at Faith. "I didn't want to upset you, Faith. But I love your mother, and I want to spend the rest of my life with her. I understand if this is hard for you, but this is about Helen and me, not just about how it affects you." Faith's face flushed with frustration. "But it does affect me. It affects all of us. You can't just..." She cut herself off, pacing back and forth before turning back to Loren and her mother. "Mom, I can't just sit here and watch this happen." Helen's eyes were full of sorrow as she looked at her daughter. "Faith, I understand this is hard for you, but I need you to trust me on this. Loren has been a part of our lives for so long, and maybe we're at a point where we need something different. A new chapter." Faith stopped pacing and stood still, her fists clenched at her sides. "A new chapter? You mean you want to marry him?" Her voice broke as she said the words, the sheer weight of the reality crashing down on her. She had never thought her mother would even consider marrying again after her father, and certainly not Loren. "Yes," Helen said softly. "I think I do." The words hung in the air, and Loren stood, giving Faith and Helen the space they needed to process the situation. He knew that, in time, they would come to terms with it. But he also knew that right now, Faith's reaction was raw, and that it would take time for her to accept what was happening. Faith felt a pang in her chest, a tight knot of confusion and hurt. She couldn't understand it. Why Loren? Why now? She had always trusted him as a friend, a family member, but this new dynamic was too foreign, too strange. It felt like the ground beneath her was shifting, and she didn't know how to find her footing. Loren spoke again, his voice quieter now, his gaze still on Faith. "I know this is a lot, and I'm sorry. But I want you to know that my feelings for your mother are real, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work, even if it means taking it slow." Helen reached across the table to take Faith's hand. "Honey, I love you. And I need you to understand that this doesn't change our relationship. I'm still your mother, and I'm not going anywhere. But sometimes life brings unexpected things. And maybe this is one of those things. Faith felt the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her, but she wasn't ready to let go of the world she had known. The world where Loren was just the family friend, the constant. The idea of him becoming something more, of him becoming part of their family in a way that was so permanent, felt impossible to accept. For now, all she could do was stare at the two people who had been the pillars of her life and wonder what this meant for their future.